Crimea. Once the pride of Russia, the symbol of absolute dominance in the Black Sea, and the very embodiment of the Kremlin's 2014 victory cry. But that glorious crown is now shattered. Today, Crimea has turned into a death trap, engulfed in smoke and surrounded by fires. The shores that once displayed power have now become swamps echoing cries for help. Russian Black Sea Fleet warships are being destroyed one by one, radar systems are blinded, S-400 batteries are silenced, air bases are reduced to ruins. But the real tragedy is that the under-equipped Ukrainian army, armed only with intelligence and technology, has brought this massive war machine to its knees. Today, more than 60,000 Russian soldiers in Crimea are trapped in an ever-tightening circle. The 1.5 million civilians sheltering with them are in silent agony, now beyond the Kremlin's reach, unable to be evacuated. The bridges have been destroyed, the ports have been destroyed, the skies belong to Ukraine. There is no fuel, there is no ammunition, there is no security. Ukraine achieved all this without even a navy, using only unmanned aerial vehicles, sea kamikazes, and long-range missiles. The final knot in this strategy was tied on September 21st. The rare B-12 Chaika amphibious aircraft stationed at Saky Air Base, which kept watch over Russia's underwater dominance in the Black Sea, were targeted. These aircraft were an extension of the Russian Navy, not only in the sky but also under the sea. But this time, the sky belonged not to them, but to the attack coming their way. The drone attack, which began at midnight, escalated with successive explosions around the airfield. Flames spread across the runway, hangars shook, and the sky was covered in a crimson blanket. The B-12s were heavy-bodied, twin-engine, torpedo-carrying amphibious platforms dating back to the Cold War era. Each one was a small but critical part of Russia's capacity to monitor activity under the Black Sea and take precautions against potential NATO submarines. Their ability to land vertically gave them a unique advantage, allowing them to be deployed both on the sea surface and at airports on land. However, this advantage was null and void against Ukrainian unmanned aerial vehicles in 2025. As a result of the attack, at least 2 B-12s were rendered completely unusable. Moreover, this loss was not only material, it also represented a major blow tactically and symbolically. These aircraft were rare for Russia. They also formed the backbone of Russia's deep listening capabilities in the Black Sea. That same night, Ukrainian intelligence field agents targeted another Russian Mi-8 helicopter near the hangar. When considered alongside the 2 Mi-8s destroyed just a few days earlier in Crimea, this attack revealed a clear strategic direction. Systematically crippling air transport and early warning capabilities was Ukraine's primary objective. However, this operation was not solely focused on air assets. Another link in the same chain of destruction was the elimination of the Nebo U radar station, one of Russia's long-range early warning radar systems, known for its wide area coverage. This radar served as the Russian military's first line of defense against air threats in both Crimea and the Azov Black Sea region. Its destruction made the skies quieter and more vulnerable for Ukraine. With all these attacks, Ukraine did not just create physical destruction, it also established a psychological blockade. By taking out old Soviet symbols like the B-12S one by one, it opened deep cracks in the Russian military memory. Crimea, once seen as an impregnable fortress, was now being systematically turned into a graveyard. This graveyard swallows not only military equipment, but also people. The 1.5 million civilians remaining on the peninsula, along with approximately 60,000 Russian soldiers, feel the circle closing in more deeply with each passing day. The shores of Yalta, once overflowing with luxury summer homes, are now filled with anxiety rather than tourists. Silence reigns in Sevastopol's crowded markets. The stalls are empty. Not only oil, sugar, and meat are missing from the shelves, but even bread is now impossible to find. When the fuel depots ran dry, military vehicles fell silent first, then the generators. Now, civilians queue for hours for the last drops of gasoline, but often, the pump shuts down before it's their turn. The severing of logistics lines by Ukraine's drone and missile attacks has cut Crimea off from the outside world, not only militarily, but also humanely. As diesel, rations and ammunition dwindle at military bases, barracks kitchens now serve canned food instead of hot meals. As the evacuation of wounded soldiers is delayed, Medicines are running out in field hospitals, and medical staff are working 3 shifts a day. Civilian hospitals are in crisis mode in every area, from childbirth to diabetes. City lights are dimmed at night, both to save energy and to confuse drones. But this darkness is not only physical, it is also the darkness of lost hope. Amidst all this, Russian propaganda still tries to convey messages of stability. But stability is now only a screen image. The reality is people trapped in shelters, empty warehouses, exhausted patients, and windows sealed with fear. To understand the story of this incredible transformation, we need to go back to 2014, to the day Putin made his famous victory speech. That day, Putin declared that Crimea has returned to its home, to its port. This was presented not only as an annexation of territory, but also as Russia's spectacular return to the global stage. Crimea would be Russia's unsinkable aircraft carrier in the Black Sea, its dagger pointing south. But Putin did not count on Ukraine's determination to resist, and its genius for turning technology into a weapon. Ukraine's strategy was built on 3 fundamental and interconnected pillars. The first and most daring goal was to destroy the Russian Black Sea Fleet, Crimea's greatest power. It seemed insane for a country without a navy to challenge one of the world's largest navies. But Ukraine used its intellect and innovation against brute force. In the first months of the war, they achieved the impossible by sending the fleet's flagship, the legendary Moskva cruiser, to the bottom of the Black Sea with their domestically produced Neptune anti-ship missiles. This was not just the sinking of a ship, but the death of a legend. Then they created a fleet of small, fast, explosive-laden kamikaze sea drones, such as the Magura V5. These Seabees began to hunt down massive Russian warships, frigates, and landing ships, worth tens of millions, even hundreds of millions of dollars, one by one. Caesar Kunikov, Olenigorsky Gornyak, Ivanovets. The list of ships sunk or severely damaged grew longer every month. The result was a complete rout. Ukraine either sank or rendered unusable at least 1/3 of the Black Sea fleet. More importantly, it forced the fleet to flee its main base of Sevastopol, where it had been stationed for 200 years, and seek refuge in the more distant port of Novorossiysk. The once mighty fleet, once the master of the Black Sea, had now become a trapped force, afraid to leave its own port. Having neutralized the Black Sea fleet, Ukraine moved on to the second phase of its strategy, to puncture the famous air defense umbrella protecting Crimea. Russia had filled the peninsula with S-400 and S-300 batteries, which it marketed as the world's most advanced air defense systems. This was a shield that was supposed to make Crimea an impenetrable fortress against Ukrainian missiles and aircraft. However, Ukraine developed an ingenious tactic to break this shield. They combined long-range, precision-guided missiles such as Storm Shadow and ATACMS, supplied by the West, with deceptive UAVs of their own production. The tactic was simple but deadly. First, they sent cheap, deceptive UAVs and missiles toward Russian air defense radars, exposing the system's vulnerabilities and forcing it to expend its expensive interceptor missiles. While Russian air defense was preoccupied with these fake targets and their locations were pinpointed, the real blow was delivered by Storm Shadow missiles, which were undetectable by radar, or ATACMS missiles, which were many times faster than the speed of sound. With this systematic hunting campaign, S-400 batteries, command centers, and, most importantly, radars across Crimea were destroyed one by one. The 55ZH-6U Nebo U long-range radar station, destroyed in the final attack, was also part of this strategy. These radars were the brain of the system. Without them, the S-400 launchers, worth hundreds of millions of dollars, were nothing more than blind piles of metal. The shield was broken. The fortress was now defenseless against any threat from the sky. To completely turn Crimea, now defenseless from sea and air, into an island prison, one final step remained. Cutting off its only land connection, the Kerch Bridge, the greatest symbol of Putin's 2014 annexation. This bridge was not just an engineering project, but also the only supply and escape route for 60,000 soldiers and hundreds of thousands of civilians on the peninsula. Ukraine used every kind of asymmetric weapon to cut off this lifeline. First, they blew up a section of the bridge with an explosive-laden truck. Then, they repeatedly attacked the bridge's pillars with kamikaze sea drones. The aim of these attacks was not to completely destroy this 19-kilometer-long colossal structure, but to render it constantly in need of repair, unreliable, and most importantly, unusable for the passage of heavy military convoys. And they succeeded. The goal of keeping the bridge closed to heavy vehicle traffic throughout the winter of 2025 plunged the Russian army in Crimea into a logistical nightmare. Now, ammunition, fuel, and supplies could only be transported by slow and risky ferries or through a narrow land corridor within range of Ukrainian missiles. The siege was complete. Realistic scenarios for the coming months are crystallizing along three axes. Each defines Crimea's fate and Russia's strategic maneuvering space separately. The first axis is controlled but sustained pressure. If Ukraine continues its current model of planned attrition, the three fundamental military pillars in Crimea, radar surveillance, air defense systems, and logistical supply lines, will be weakened a little more each week. This model creates a constant rhythmic tension between deep strikes and short-range countermeasures. Every week, a different radar is hit. Every air defense station experiences temporary blindness. Every bridge and railway line is sabotaged at regular intervals. The constant tension on the Kerch bridge, in particular, targets not only transportation, but also the strategic nervous system. Similarly, in ports such as Sevastopol and Feodosia, warships can only venture out during a narrow window of safe hours. These hours are gradually shrinking. The sustainability of this scenario largely depends on Ukraine's ability to maintain its industrial production capacity in a disciplined manner. If kamikaze sea drones, FPV swarms, and tactical UAVs continue to be used regularly and in multiple layers, a cycle of attrition will emerge in which Russia will have to manage a new loss every week. This slow but steady attrition makes Crimea a strategic liability. The second axis is the sudden acceleration and simultaneous destruction scenario. With the deployment of F-16 fighter jets, the diversification of Western munitions, and the introduction of new radar jamming systems, Ukraine's strike capacity will not only grow, but also become more selective and simultaneous. In this case, the target list will no longer consist solely of accessible elements, but will be filled with those carrying strategic value. Radar systems such as Nebo U and Podlet, airbase command centers, and connection arteries such as Kerch and Chongar can all be targeted simultaneously with different munitions within the same week. Such an increase in tempo results not only in physical destruction, but also in the collapse of information flow, the disintegration of morale, and the disabling of repair reflexes. However, the Russian side's response to such an acceleration depends on its thick reserve capacity. In other words, if there is a backup for the disabled radar, if an alternative command cell can be established to replace the hit station, this shock can be overcome. But the current war fatigue and the collapse of the defense industry caused by Western sanctions do not make such a backup visible. Therefore, this axis could become a scenario that collapses Crimea not only strategically, but also psychologically. This axis represents the dramatic possibility that a single major blow could have long-term consequences. The Kerch bridge being closed for months, the Chongar Pass being blown up, or the fuel terminal at the Feodosia port being completely destroyed. Such a permanent disruption would redefine the profile of all military presence on the peninsula. In this case, the issue would no longer be daily resupply, but the sustainability of the military presence. Ammunition cannot be transported, reserve units cannot arrive, and the wounded cannot be evacuated. As the units in Crimea are slowly depleted, Russia is forced to divert resources from other regions, creating vulnerabilities on other fronts. This is the scenario the Kremlin fears most. Crimea becoming not an outpost, but a giant trap. So what can Russia do? The Russian army has begun producing mock-ups of the Nebo U, Podlet, and Castor systems, and deploying them to disrupt attack plans. Efforts to make real targets invisible are increasing, using camouflage nets, infrared reflector systems, and heat source simulators. This may work to deceive cheap reconnaissance waves. However, when the strike wave comes, the distinction between real and fake can be made quickly based on factors such as thermal signature, electromagnetic profile, and radar reflection. Short-range air defense systems like Tor M2 and Pantsir S1 are now deployed much more frequently around bases. But each of these systems has to expend dozens of munitions every night to counter dozens of drones. This is sustainable for a few nights, but under constant pressure, both munitions and crew begin to run out. This type of defense provides close protection, but is exhausting in the long run. Ships belonging to the Black Sea Fleet now spend less time outside the base. They only make short-term sorties under air defense cover, not during risky hours. Some ships are even kept within the base without ever leaving the port. This reduces the drone threat, but largely eliminates the deterrent and operational significance of the Navy. As naval power retreats into its shell, it becomes strategically ineffective. Ultimately, regardless of which axis materializes, the immutable reality is this: Crimea is no longer a self-sustaining, self-defending fortress maintaining its own rhythm. Every defensive maneuver opens up another expense account. Every declaration of success heralds a new risk. In this equation, Russia is losing not only time, but also territory and prestige. And this picture is turning into a strategic opportunity not only for Ukraine, but also for the West that supports it. If what we've shared in this video has helped you see the realities in Crimea more clearly, don't forget to like and subscribe. We're also curious to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Russia can halt this decline? Or has Crimea become an irreversible loss? Every comment you leave helps us reach more people with this kind of content. See you in the next video. We'll be back with behind-the-scenes insights into the Ukraine war, strategic analyses, and on-the-ground realities. Stay tuned. Be the voice of resistance and knowledge.